from Martin Springo. Hi, Shane, lifelong fan of you and your work. First time writing in. Thank you, but appreciate it. My question is about the crowd, specifically the physical chemical thing that detonates inside a wrestler when real reaction lands, face or heel. Mick Foley, Chris Jericho, Shawn Michaels have all circled the same description of dopamine surge, the tunnel vision, the way the roar slams in your chest before you hear your ears even registered as sound. You're chasing a neurological state nothing in civilian life can touch. I can't begin to imagine what that must feel like, and I'm fascinated by it. Three things I'd love to take your take on. For the first time, do you remember the first night a crowd hit you with that way physically? When it stopped being noise and became something your body absorbed? What town and what spot in the match? Heat versus pop. As the franchise, you generated some of the most venomous heat of that era. Thank you. It was our job. And ECW heat was its own animal. Did heel heat feel differently chemically than a babyface pop? No. Exact same thing. Roddy Piper always said he preferred heat because the crowd was locked in on him specifically. Does that track for you? Yes. And I'll go back through these again real quick. Does it ever fade over the career that long? Did the hit dull with repetition, or did the right crowd and the right building still detonate the same way on the night 1000 as it did night one? Thanks for everything you give to the business and for still being one of the most honest voices about it. All the best, Martin from Toronto. Man, great questions. I mean, these are like PhD level questions. I'm going to tackle them though. Yes, there's the first time I remember that in my career was early on in the independents. You know, now you have to understand the mindset at this point. Mick and I were always on Dominic shows, the curtain jerk. Mick Foley and I. And we're, probably his two best, most accomplished students, so it makes perfect sense. Mickey, by that way, was going at that time a Cactus Jack and really know how to generate heat, real good heat. A different style of heat, but good at getting the heat. And, good, did all the elbow off the apron and all that kind of stuff. Even then was laying his body on the line. He and I talked about this quite often, not specifically about the crowd pop, because I don't think we'd have been that pretentious. Hey, do you hear a big pop we're going to get tonight? We were always a bit nervous going to the ring. There's a point in this ring, I was talking to my manager earlier, where you don't know what you don't know. You just know there's a whole lot of it. I was pretty accomplished at anything I'd ever done prior to wrestling and not used to being the odd man out, the guy that doesn't fit in. And suddenly you're in a dressing room. The first night Mick and I were at that show in Warren, Ohio, we're sitting there with Offa, Sika, and Bruno and David and the Valiant Brothers, I believe. And the night that we find out what Kayfabe meant, and I learned what Kayfabe meant. And I remember, I forget if he said it to me or I said it to him, but one of us said to the other, what are we doing here? How did we get in here? Because we don't belong in this room with all these other guys, right? We knew we were good for like local wrestling, but we always thought we weren't as good as those guys on TV. We weren't quite that accomplished. So in long story sort of abbreviated in, I got my break in UWF. Eddie Gilbert, Dominic had a couple, like a week long, 7 or 8 days of shots where he and Bill, who'd been friends previously, Bill's UWF was getting pretty hot on TV, and he brought them up. So first half of the show was Dominic would be the final match before the intermission. Mickey and I would be the curtain jerk. Second half would be all the UWF guys and women, Dark Journey and Missy Hyatt. That night, there were like 2,500, 2,300, whatever the capacity is on the Nathan Goth Arena in Clarksburg, West Virginia. And when I pinned Mickey, in my head, it sounded like the roof blew off the place. It was probably the first good, like, sustained applause, like good, decent pop. But, coming from where we did, where you worked in front of 100 people, having that many, it was intoxicating. And didn't get a chance to enjoy it because as we walked back, Terry Taylor and Eddie Gilbert grabbed us and pulled us right out of the loading dock and started, the whole thing that I've talked about previously, talking about us going on the road and things. So, but I love the descriptions of it. I don't know who you ascribe, of the names you give Jericho, Foley, and Shawn Michaels. about the tunnel vision, the dopamine surge, the roar slams into the chest, the ears even register the sound. It's so strange because I'd never heard those descriptions before. I always say it's like you get into a groove, like in the old days when you had the LPs, the vinyl records, the needle would go into the groove and you get the music. You will come back from the ring and you can't even remember what you just did 30 seconds ago, 10 minutes ago. But it's an incredible match. You just sort of hit this like auto drive where it just takes over and this match just sort of develops and just lays out. And it doesn't happen often. I'd say 10 times in my career, maybe. But when they happen, it is, your first thought is, anyway, when I got to the back, my first thought was that match wasn't as good as it could have been. And then like, as people started talking, you're the buzz in the crowd, and then like you see it back. Remember, Paul would send me the tapes, and so I could, help with the booking on stuff, directions on angles and things. I remember watching, when I listen to a song, I could never do the first time, doesn't me any justice. I got to listen to it, then listen to it again and again and again. And then at some point, my ear will decide it's either a great song or a shit song. Same thing with watching, especially watching yourself back. And then you start watching and you start seeing the things in between, like in those little subtleties in the corners and over here and over there. And then you see like what the fans are watching. Understand, we go to the ring having a general idea of what we're going to do. Not move for move per se, but what's going to be the heat spot, what's going to be the go home, that kind of thing. We have to then fill in those blocks out there on the run, on the fly. And, but the third time I watched it back, it clicked. Like, boom, okay, this is a damn good match. And you can see it. Those descriptions that you ascribe to Foley and Jericho and Michaels are spot on. The dopamine rush, all of that, it's all there. Francine had recently asked me about the night that I had the flu at the arena. And she said, do you remember the night you had the flu at the arena? Had she not said that, I wouldn't have. I would have had no reason to bring it up. But once she mentioned it, it clicked, boom, right there. Brought it back from those cobwebs in the back. And I was so sick. And the whole night, I'm in an inner panic. I can barely stand up. How am I going to go out and do a 45-minute match? And she goes, well, she's telling me this recently, a couple months back. She said, the weirdest thing happened. She said, your music hit, you looked down at your boots for a few seconds. You looked at me and said, are you ready? And you walked through that curtain. She goes, and you were perfectly fine. She goes, I swore you were ribbing me. And we came back and I collapsed flat on my face on the other side of the curtain. Boom, face down, out. And 100%, exactly what happened. Now, people will say, well, okay, the adrenaline's flowing. Yeah, it's somewhat. But, for those of, pretty much everybody out there has been sick at some point. Think of the worst sick you've ever had. Like, this was one of those flus where, like, you couldn't stand up. And, you're the main event and, it's just a nightmare. And that's what I mean when I say magic in that building, the ECW arena. Because the adrenaline, okay, I could have gotten through a 5, 7, 8 minute match, maybe a 10-minute tops. But I was so weak I couldn't stand up. And went out there and had a 45-minute solid, damn good match. I can only describe it as the magic in that building. In between the piss and the shit coming out of the bathrooms and long before the renovation, there was some kind of mojo in that building that I've heard everybody talk about, and I think it fits right in with these other descriptions you get from these guys. Heat versus pop. Francine talks about this all the time with the fans. We used to hate. There was early on when the triple threat was first, the final version of the triple threat, was put together. We were getting like 4 different reactions. I would get booed. Bammer would get like sort of golf clap, sort of like a muted boo. Candido would get some applause and some boos, and he'd go into his animations. And Franny, of course, would get popped, right? I can't figure out why to this day. But we needed to bring that all together. It needed to be consistent. It needed to be the same reaction through. And so we started, giving Franny a little more duties to do. And I have talked about before, she picked him up beautifully. And Bammer and Chris knew exactly what to do. So once we got that heat and were able to maintain it, and because the way Paul had booked us, at one point the belts all dripping off our shoulders, the tag belts, the TV title, the world title, and kept them there for a protracted period. That legitimized us. That suddenly put the triple threat in the same realm as the other great heel dynasties, the Four Horsemen and the House of Humperdinck and Hot Stuff International and all those previous great heel factions and stables. We hated, Franny would still occasionally get some pops, and she would come back and she'd be the first to bitch about it. She goes, I don't know why these people keep cheering me. And I said, oh, I don't know. There might be a couple reasons, and she hated, we wanted those boos. We didn't want the reason that the franchise spoke in the way he did. It was to be that over the top cerebral jackass that speaks vulgarities because he's crass. It's like the Charlie Tuna thing, right? Sorry, Charlie, we wanted tuna with that tastes good, not with good taste. The old commercials for the StarKist tuna brand. We needed it to be the booze. And, a lot of people, you'd see like right in that same time frame where other places would try to turn somebody heel, some babyface heel. And they would go out and wrestle the exact same way, do nothing different. And then lament that the fans wouldn't boo them. I said one time to Sting, the fans will boo Jesus Christ if he goes out and does the right thing. We always, the heat versus pop, exact same feeling. If we started getting popped, we felt like we had lost something. We were slipping. And so we'd go to the well, and come up with new ideas, something for Franny to say on the mic or to do at ringside. And like I said, Chris and Bammer never needed any direction. They were always in control. And does it ever fade? I guess it does in this sense that once you start to get acclimated to what we do, and you're not so nervous willy-nilly, like Steve Austin and I talked about the first 5, 6, 7 years we were in the business, we were like fish out of water. We had no idea what we were doing. And then at a certain point, you start to settle in and get a little comfortable. You hadn't mastered anything, but the way I always say it is, if something went wrong, my hair wouldn't catch on fire like it would previously. And then like you work your ass off to learn that craft from all those great teachers we've had, and I've given the names a million times. But I think with time, as you become more acquainted with being in the main event at the top of the card, you don't pay as much attention to it. I for one, will plead guilty on towards the end of ECW, my time in ECW. I wasn't being as diligent as I would have been, say, 2 or 3 years earlier. In large part because the money, there's a million things going on, right? Not just in your professional life, but also your home life. And, there's a million things going on in your life that you sometimes, come back. I had a ton of fun. I think it shows in the performances. But I didn't have the kind of fun I should have had at ECW because I was always concerned. We were always 3 weeks away from insolvency. If once ECW started up that ladder, that ECW arena had been half full the next time, that could have been the end of ECW. So we were always nose to the grindstone. And for me being the guy, I was so concerned that if it falters, as great as it's been, it'll all get pinned on me, And so I didn't enjoy it as much as I could have. So in that sense, I think it might have waned with time. But when you get one of those pops, especially as described here, and you've heard me talk about forever as the magic in the building and the mojo is whatever. It is like a powerful drug. And I say that as an ex-OxyContin user. Blows that out of the water. It is such a powerful high that I wish every human being could get at least one split second feel of what it feels like to be in front of an audience when you're in control at your peak and can really deliver the goods of what everybody's paid their money to come see that night. It really is intoxicating. And let's make sure I got everything answered here. That's right. Supposed to. Yeah, finally ask, does the right crowd in the right building still detonate in the same way on night 1,000 as it did night one? Yes. If you're put in that position and you deliver the goods, you'll certainly always notice it. It's never not there. You know, you're never totally unaware of it. But you can certainly, like with time, you I don't want to make it sound like big-headed, like, well, I expected it to be that. It's just like you sort of get to that point where you don't want to look pretentious to the other guys in the locker room, like you're buying into your own gimmick or whatever. I'm sure it does to some extent, but anytime you hear that pop or booze, as it were, that we would always go to get, you notice it and you appreciate it because that's what you're there for, right? So great questions, Martin. I hope I got them answered for you to the fullest. And I've never heard those descriptions before, so I'm glad to have gotten it. So appreciate the question, man. Thank you.